shape. So, last time I was here, I don't know about you, but I had a good time. I prepared a PowerPoint, and they came with some things to teach you about, and we asked you what are you interested in, and immediately we shelved the PowerPoint, and we talked about the things you wanted to talk about. So that made for a good time. A variation on that. So Vincenza very thoughtfully surveyed everybody, and of course everybody's interested in something different, but we were able to put it together a little bit and say that you're really interested in how to bolster kids' basic skills in reading and in math. So that's what we're here to address today, okay? So strengthening reading and math in the inclusive classroom. And my idea is to talk about what are some critical skills to address, which you pretty much know already, so we'll just capture that together. And then talk about, so what are the most effective practices for the kids who myself as a special educator am most concerned for. So I work primarily with the kids with the high incidence disabilities, learning disabilities, ADHD, highest levels of intellectual disability, the highest levels of the autism spectrum, kids with emotional behavioral disorders. That's principally who I'm thinking of. And then there are all those other kids who we just call struggling learners because you know, insufficient background in their learning, that sort of thing. They might have some cultural differences, they might have some language challenges, which are not disabilities, but they look like it. So that's kind of the orientation I'm going to take for this. So far, so good? All right, here we go. So, let me bring up a sore subject. Remember that gym membership you bought? How'd that go? Yeah, right? Right? Yeah. What was the problem?
Didn't go.
Didn't go. That's pretty much the problem. It didn't go, right?
Didn't go.
Yeah. That's the basic problem for a lot of our kids. If by the end of the school year, our kids haven't quite got the stuff we've been teaching them all year, it's an analogy like, well, I didn't go to the gym as often as I should have. I didn't go regularly. I didn't do the right routine when I was there. Right? If your kids have made it to the end of the school year and they really haven't progressed on something, they didn't get the correct workout. That's really what it boils down to. So, with that kind of sobering thought, let's get started. All right, so let's start with reading. So, I want to go fast through a couple of slides because I feel like this is probably relatively familiar information, but absolutely, this is your hour. Slow me down. Tell me to say more if you like. Okay. So the great Jean Shah, who unfortunately died a couple of years ago, was a professor over at Harvard, and she told us something that we all kind of know, but because she was from Harvard, we really paid attention. Right? She said there are 6 stages to the reading process. The ultimate goal of reading is that you can do the top stage, which, by the way, is number 5, where you can construct meaning and you can reconstruct meaning. You can read at really high levels. You can think independent thoughts based on what the author is telling you. You can interpret the author's perspective. You can make rich and interesting connections. That's where we really want to get our kids. And it starts down at the first stage, which you refer to as pre-reading, where you learn about language, where you learn that these things with the fun pictures of them, those little squiggly lines that your parents seem to be looking at when they tell you the story, oh, those are words, and you know, you go from there, right? So we start from building our foundation, understanding of what a book, a text is, building foundations about language, and then we get to decoding. And for decoding, you need to have phonological awareness as well as memory for phonology, and a lot of our kids with LD, ADHD in particular, intellectual disability, they have memory challenges. They have trouble remembering those sounds. They have trouble remembering what letters and letter combinations associate with those sounds. It's not always that they don't hear it. Sometimes they have to constantly relearn it. So there's the analogy of going to the gym. They need more workouts, right? And they also need to develop word attack skills. So that's a skill, word attack. You need to figure out how to get that done. That gets you started on decoding. When you get pretty good at decoding, and Charlotte's not one of these people who says, you must master this step before you can go to this step, and you must master this step before you can go to this step. That's kind of the DISTARD direct instruction model, you know? That's not all bad, except for some kids it takes them forever to master it. You must have a solid foundation, Charlotte tells us, and she's right about that. So when you have a solid foundation in decoding, then you can move up to confirmation and fluency. And we like to say that third grade is traditionally the grade level at which kids ought to be embarking on fluent reading. Which, Charles said, that moves us from inside out, in other words, spending all your efforts on decoding words, to outside in reading, where you're focusing on the meaning. Right? You've moved from learning how to read to learning via reading. Yeah, right? Okay. And so we need our decoding skills and we need fluency, and that's what I want to talk about today, is bolstering decoding and fluency together. And those together lead to comprehension, and that's where you really begin to read to learn. So note that little bit of a distinction there. We first have to get our kids to confirmation and fluency, which means they can easily confirm those words say what I think they say. It's not really hard for me to figure those out. And then I start to get fluent. I can read faster because of that. Then I can start reading to learn. And when I get pretty good at that, now I can start to do critical reading or taking multiple viewpoints and really start to interpret. And when I get pretty good at that, then I can go to that grand high level of reading where you all are today. And this, by the way, is what we do whether we're reading an article in a newspaper, a textbook, or a trashy romance novel on the beach. Any kind of reading, ultimately that's what you're doing. And that's where we want to get our kids to, right? So, this slide's a little grainy to read, I apologize for that. So following that progression, then what are the staircases? What are the levels of reading instruction that we embark upon? Well, first we start with reading readiness activities, right? Helping kids get ready to work on phonology, and then we develop their phonological awareness and their syllabication, learning to break words apart and to hear the sounds and words, right? Those of us who are poor spellers, definitely me. One reason people are poor spellers is we don't carefully hear the sounds in words. And developing phonological awareness and becoming aware of syllabication really helps us develop those processes. Then we start learning about word patterns. We learn about spelling patterns and sounds that they make based, on how the word falls out. That helps us build our word attack skills, in other words, structural analysis of words. All that just to get to the point of starting to become a fluent reader. Once fluent, then we work on reading comprehension, higher level reading. So this represents the progression of good reading instruction. If we find our kids are struggling at any one of these upper steps, it's because they need more work out at the lower steps. It doesn't mean they have to go back and they can't keep working on the grade level appropriate skills and that kind of thing. It doesn't mean that for most kids, But we still have to work on these foundation steps. We can't say, don't worry about it, they're beyond that now. Or, they'll figure it out for themselves. Your kids ever figure it out for themselves?
I have the most baffling child this year.
Okay.
Has obviously progressed through everything to fluency.
Yeah.
I mean, he's reading probably above grade level
Yeah.
and can't understand it.
Great. That's good. In the sense that we know that all the foundations are
I
solid.
shouldn't say, he
Fluency.
understands what he's saying, but he can't retell what he's saying after he's read it. So
okay.
it's a comprehension issue.
It is a
really.
comprehension issue, right? Yeah.
That's all it is.
Okay.
Because if you came in the room and asked him to read, and he's reading to you,
Mhm.
you wouldn't peg him for anybody who has any kind of a
Sure.
problem at all.
And that's perfectly legitimate. It might be that there's part of the comprehension issue is memory. It might be. Probably not, but it could be. Right? Odds are it's not, but it could be. So we want to look into that. But that's, again, that's good. The foundational stuff is not holding him back.
No.
His problem is fluency. Some kids do fine in the foundations and fluency becomes their problem. Some kids do fine in the foundations and fluency and comprehension is their first reading problem.
Yeah, comprehension's definitely.
Yeah. Fortunately, the vast majority of kids who are struggling readers, it's with the foundational stuff. And if you get them through the foundational stuff, they take off. Of course, if they're not strong at that, it's going to impair their ability to develop fluency and comprehension. So you're in good shape because you know exactly what you want to target. So let's talk specifically about that. It's like I paid you to say that. It's right on time. So are we doing okay? Is this too, we already know all this. Okay, all right. So reading fluency, of course, is the ability to read text quickly and accurately and with expression, or the 50-cent word for expression is prosody. Now, as a male in the room, I would just like to speak on behalf of males and say it just is a fact that males are weaker at prosody than females, even as little kids, certainly as adults, right? So the most important elements, now I really sound like a male because we're not good at it, the most important elements are the other ones. Speed and accuracy, right? Rate and accuracy, those are the ultimately important elements of fluency. Using proper expression, being able to read with expression and intonation, really grasping the punctuation, for example, and the structure of the sentence is important. But most critical is that we build up our speed. Okay, so we need a solid sight word vocabulary. We need excellent decoding skills for when the sight words don't work for us. So to become fluent means we are decreasing decoding demands so that cognitively we can focus on comprehension. Okay? So your students got the decrease of the decoding demands and is moving up to being fluent, which is preparation for comprehension. So great instruction, here's that gym analogy, unfortunately. Great instruction, repeated practice of text. So I want to talk to you about a specific approach to repeated reading. But first, let's just say a couple of key points about repeated reading. All right? So when we do repeated reading, we want to read and reread short, meaningful passages. When I say short, it depends a little bit on your reader's endurance, but no more than a single page. Short, so that they can really go to town on it a couple times over. And you might say, well, we have a huge, 45 or 60-minute reading block, so that's plenty of time to reread something longer. No, reread something short, because we want their memories to be strong on what they're reading. Because what they are doing, here's that gym analogy, what they are doing is they are doing their repetitions, their condition training. You can tell I don't go to the gym, I'm not even sure which phrase to use. But one of those things where you do it over and over again to get stronger at it, right? So keep it short enough so that they can stay focused, okay? Makes it very familiar. It boosts their confidence, which we know is important. And in the spirit of going to the gym more often, it increases their time on text. It increases how much time they're practicing reading. They have to get reading workouts. Just like when we go to the gym, however, it has to be an appropriate workout so they don't burn out, so they don't injure themselves. Right? Just put down as an aside, if you're already thinking, well, how are we going to do repeated reading? One way to do it in a busy classroom is to have tape recordings. So if the student has a recorded text, they can listen to, maybe with an earbud even, they can tape record themselves doing the repeated reading. So you could have multiple kids in separate corners doing their repeated readings at the same time if you're concerned about being able to be with them when they do it. So let's talk more about what the technical skills are. All right. So again, in just a moment I'm going to show you a specific procedure. If you're going to do repeated readings, you must do it consistently. Repeat it on a regular basis, right? So this is a big investment. We must commit to doing repeated readings on a regular basis or we're not doing repeated readings. It just isn't what we're doing, right? The text needs to be at the independent or at most the instructional level. For most kids, if they're a little bit of a struggling reader, we really want them at the independent level. Because we are building the skills of reading, we don't want them struggling as they practice those skills. We want them to practice those skills comfortably to make them strong. So ideally, we read aloud 5 or more times. Some repeated reading approaches call for 3 times, and that actually works fine. I'm just kind of pushing it a little bit maybe by saying 5. So at least 3. I do advocate for 5 or more times in a setting, in a seating. So that's why we don't want to have a super long passage. Work on increasing their phrasing or their prosody, their expression, right? Short, frequent sessions, 5 times, 10 to 15 minutes each. Another reason for a short passage, okay? It's not painful. We're not getting worn out and exhausted. We've done our repeated reading. That's over with. That wasn't hard at all. Setting goals always helps, and if students can participate in goal setting and in tracking their own progress, that too can be very motivating. So this all sounds very familiar, yes? Okay.
I was just going to say, I'm doing my practicum right now for Warren Gillingham, and I tutor a lot of kids, and so I give them like word lists if we're working on certain sounds that they have to read, and I used to only have them read before this training, read it like once or twice, and my instructor told me like they have to do it like 4 times. At first I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to complain, she's so crazy. But what we do for the word list is the kids have to look for a certain feature, like they go through and they mark the syllables, they go through and read it another time and like highlight like a certain sound. But I know that for the kids I tutor has really helped them like not feel like it's as much of a chore, because they're not just reading lists so many times, they're like, they kind of have an activity with it, you know, but adding in like the highlighting and stuff seems to really increase their interest.
Oh, thank you, I appreciate that, it helps a lot, yeah. So, yeah, right, they have a goal, it's an obtainable goal, right? And they can see themselves getting better. That's, right, that's very rewarding.
Yeah, I do feel like it's really helpful for them though if they're looking for a certain feature, if it is like a phonetic thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's made a big difference.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it, great. And do you feel like doing now you're doing it 4 times instead of twice, do you feel like that's contributing to the
It
difference?
does, yeah. At first I was kind of iffy on it, but I do see a big improvement like in their progression through things, so.
Ah, excellent, okay, great, thank you. So, the approach I thought I'd share with you, this is where I have to check in and see whether you're going to say, oh yeah, we already know this. And if you do, I'm ready for you. PALS, do we know PALS reading? Do something with your heads to say yes or no.
No.
Okay, got it, thank you. So PALS stands for Peer Assisted Learning Strategies. And so let's agree, I'm not teaching you PALS today, I'm introducing PALS to you today. It would take a lot more to really fully teach it to you. I started the stack here, so maybe on this side of it. So it would take a lot more than a 1-hour workshop to teach you all the features of PALS. But if we could overview it today, I think you can get an appreciation for, what goes into doing repeated reading in a systematic way. And one of the things I like about PALS is it's one of the 2 or 3 most researched interventions in special ed. That's an amazing claim to make. Something's got to be, and this is it. And it has a tremendous track record of success for kids from elementary through high school, okay? So, PALS, Peer Assisted Learning Strategies, is a way for students to do repeated readings together. So, the sheet you have, I know you can't read it up here on the screen, the sheet you have lists all these steps. Starts with preparation. So the first thing you want to do is you want to pair up your students. So what you should do is you should take your roster of readers in your class who you're going to use PALS with, rank order them, because it gets some recent data, and rank order them from strongest to weakest reader. And since we're concerned with fluency, we'll say in terms of their fluency or their ability to read on instructional level. Okay, very good. Take that rank ordered list, cut it in half. Take the bottom half and put it up next to the top half. So the top name on the left side gets matched with the top name on the right side. Second name gets matched with the second name. Third name with the third name. That way, what you're doing is you're making pairs with comparatively stronger, pardon my language, weaker readers. Right? Okay. So that's the way we start. That's how kids get assigned. And each pair is approximately equal distance in terms of stronger and weaker reader skill differences. So that's how we begin. All right. The first thing we do is call partner reading with retell. And notice that, as your handout says, it takes 5 minutes. So we're going quick when we do all this stuff. In partner reading, what happens is we have a tutor and a tutee, which they're going to switch roles in terms of who's tutor and who's tutee. So we have to say, you know, we have to have a designation for which kid gets to be tutor first. You know that that happens to be the higher performing reader of the two. So you want to come up with whatever your system's going to be for having them know they're the red team or the green team or this kind of thing. I know some people who did a lot of work with PALS down in the Virginia area where there are a lot of military families, and so they divided the kids up, and some kids were called the admirals and some kids were called the generals, and that made everybody pretty good. And so today the admirals go first. Well, the admirals, guess who they were? They happen to be the tutor club kids. So, you know, come up with your system. Tutor reads first, and the tutee has a job. Everybody in the class has to learn how to do this. They have to read along. This isn't round robin where you can look at everything but the reading. They have a job to do. While the tutor is reading as a model for them, they are reading along silently, checking the tutor's accuracy. And so they learn how to say things like, stop, you missed that word if there's an omission. Can you figure it out? And they learn how to count out about 4 seconds in their head, tap it out if they need to. And if the tutor cannot come up with the correct answer, then the tutee can say, that word is, and then actually quizzes the tutor and says, what is that word? Now you say it. So everybody's practicing that skill right there, okay? So they read through typically a paragraph, okay? Typically a paragraph. So somewhere in the range of 5 sentences. Then they switch roles and they repeat it with the very same paragraph. They go back to the beginning of the paragraph. Now the tutee reads aloud and the tutor has this job of monitoring and correcting. So the weaker of the two readers just heard it, saw it, and cognitively thought carefully about it in the process of monitoring the tutor. And now, for a second read, is going to be in charge of doing the reading. They've switched roles. The tutees, now the reader, and the tutor is going to really be the tutor who attends to the reading and gives feedback, okay? Then, that tutee who just finished reading retells the sequence of the story. So just very quickly to wrap it up before we move on to the next activity, kids, second reader, just retell us what happened so far in the story in your own words. So, paying attention to the content, which is going to help our comprehender, right? And preparing them to move to the next stage. So, read, get tutored, reread, get tutored, quick summary, and we move on. And by the way, to incentivize kids in the PAL system, they earn points. So, they can award themselves points. They're on the honor system here to do it accurately. Okay? For every sentence that you hear read correctly, make a hash mark. That's a point your team just got, right? And if you do a really high quality story retell, you can earn as many as 10 points, which you can reward yourself. So again, it's the kind of honor system. The teacher is walking around the room, monitoring the pairs, and she can award bonus points as she walks past for students who are doing a really good job. So if your kids respond to the incentive of competition and winning points and that kind of thing, that's been found to be an effective part of it. All right, so they're ready to move on. The next thing is called paragraph shrinking, and for some reason, sometimes people refer to it as paragraph skimming instead. So, we're keeping it fresh. We're not rereading. We're doing something different this time. So we're continuing on with the oral reading, and it's the same process of the stronger reader, the designated tutor, goes first as the model. Stop at the end of each paragraph, and the tutor, the reader, this time asks the tutee, who's been monitoring, to name the main idea. So students have to learn what a main idea is. It's who or what the paragraph is about. And of course, they need to learn how to identify a main idea. There are a couple different ways to do that, right? In a well-written paragraph, it's the first sentence. If that doesn't work, then the best option is to look and see if there's a transition or a wrap-up sentence. If neither of those things work, then you have to work harder, and you have to reflect for yourself, what was this mostly about? All right. The tutee, who's just been asked what's the main idea, shrinks the main idea into 10 words or fewer. So it's really paraphrasing, it's rephrasing, shrinking, getting it down. And if the tutor says, that's not quite right, skim and try again, the student tries once more. And if it's still not correct, then the tutor gives the correct answer. We're moving at a fairly rapid pace. Okay, we don't want the kids to get bored. We don't want this to be too punitive. Okay? They have up to 5 minutes to do that, and then they switch roles and they repeat again, using the very same paragraphs. So repeated readings, really going over the same paragraph again and again and again. Hal switches it up a little bit by giving you different roles to play each time you go through it. One more stage, and then we'll chat a little bit. Oh, sorry, the point system. So you can get a point for each time you correctly identify who or what the paragraph is about, the main idea. 1 point if your main idea is consistent with what's most important, so it truly is the main idea, right? And if you shrink it in 10 words or fewer, you can earn a point for that. Okay. Now we'll move on, I'm sorry. This time we shake it up a little bit, and we do a prediction relay. So the kids have been reading these connected paragraphs, but of course they've been stopping and rereading and doing exercises with them, okay? So they're about halfway through the story perhaps, expository or narrative, it works either way. Okay. This time we switch roles. The tutee, the weaker of the two readers, gets to go first this time. And so this kind of balances out roles and that kind of thing. Okay. It makes a prediction. What's going to happen in the second half of the page? What's coming next in this story or this piece of information? And then the tutor gets to say, I agree, I think that is what's going to happen. Or, I disagree, or, taking a more policing role, you need to make a better prediction, that's not really good, and so they need to talk about that a little bit. So, we're working on the skills of fluency, and we're barging in on comprehension. Have you been attending? Have you been thinking what this is about while you're practicing reading it accurately and with a reasonable rate of speed? What is it about? Okay. So that tutee now reads the second half of the page, again going first this time for switch. The tutee reads the second half of the page and confirms or disconfirms her or his own prediction. I was right because, well, I wasn't quite right because, right? So they're really attending to the content this time. Now, the reader, the tutee, gets to summarize the main idea. This is what this was all about. So again, with the main idea. And now, last time they switch roles, and the original tutor now gets to follow these steps. And again, the point system, you can award points for doing each of those things. So, questions, comments, what do you think about the house?
What if they disagree on something? Should they just on the main idea? Would they just have a discussion together and then kind of come to a compromise and agreement?
Yeah, absolutely. So You know, it is conceivable that two thoughtful readers can ultimately disagree. The presumption is that one of them is going to be able to convince the other one. All right? But absolutely, if they need to disagree forevermore, they can. And so you can imagine some stubborn kids are going to disagree when they're wrong. Right? So,
And does it ever happen that the tutor becomes like the boss and tries to take over? Like, what do you do in a situation like that?
well, that's why they have these roles, and they have to learn their correct roles. And the teacher's circulating around, and when she catches a student doing the inappropriate thing, then her task is to maybe take away a point or, you know, that kind of thing. So, yeah, there's a lot of need for kids to be responsible, to learn the appropriate behaviors, to do this correctly. So definitely that happens. Especially competitive kids who don't want that kid causing us to lose points. Right? I'm not always big on the competition thing, but it does work. Let me give you a sentence starter. This won't work with my kids because...
I think you'd have to have a lot of practice before, like a lot of demonstrations, a lot of, before that they could actually get into it by themselves, like have the class sit around and have two kids do it. And then work on that and work on strategies like if they disagree, what should we do? I think before we got to the actual, I think the idea is great. I think, but before that gets to it, I think, you know, that's like if you start in September, that's like a end of October, November kind of thing to get used to it.
I quite agree, absolutely. There's a procedure. Yeah. You're gonna have to.
I can share something if you like. Kind of like what like my kids, some of my kids, like they get so angry when someone else isn't on their level. Like I have one girl, she just like gets super frustrated when like someone else like doesn't pick up as quickly as she does. And like she means really well, but she's just so frustrated that they're not with her. That she just no longer can like contain herself. She's just really
Is my guess.
yeah, oh yeah, it's like she like does really well, but like there's a point where like she'll be working with like a partner or something like that, and like it'll be like halfway through, and she just kind of like, what do you mean you don't get it? And it's just like, oh, okay, separate this pair, because she's just so frustrated because she's trying so hard to like work with a group or work with that person, and if they're not rapidly going with her, she just like completely loses interest in them and what she's doing. So she means well though.
Well, you know, those kids, you can thoughtfully partner them sometimes with the strategic right partner. You can give them a badge. You're really good at this. You know, I don't want you to get frustrated. I want you to be my deputy teacher. You know, and your students aren't going to get it right the first time, so you can't get mad at them. Your job is to really help your partner. Sometimes they fall for that.
I could see this working in a situation where maybe you have a reading buddy classroom and you could start it off in an early stage at the beginning of the year where if you have an older group of students working with the younger group of students, because then it builds the confidence of the little ones to, you know, maybe have a voice, and it also builds the confidence of some lower readers in the higher level grades to you know, speak up, and so it's symbiotic. It kind of, you know, benefits both of the students and kids, so that kind of could work out.
I would quite agree. I forget your name, I'm so sorry.
Oh, sorry, Sarah.
Sarah.
I was gonna say, I do for the Scholastic News, they work with a partner, and it's usually like, I do like the ability, like a high one, low one, and that. And I feel like my kids were doing so poorly on it before. I hate to say that, but I call them like each other's like accountability coach, because some of them like weren't even like looking back at the text, and they have like crazy answers. And so at least now, like they kind of catch each other, and it like you do have to be careful with partners. But I feel like it's definitely helped them. Like I'm seeing more correct answers now. But
Great.
I'd like to try to add a little something.
So, as I said before, there's been a lot of research on PALS. I mean, it's heavily researched. It really has been documented as working from elementary through high school when it's done right, when it's done with fidelity, when it's done the way fathead professors from universities who haven't been in your classroom in 20 years say, just do this, why don't you do this, why don't you do that, why didn't you do it this way, right? So you have the real life challenge of translating it into the serene environment of your classroom, shall we say. But just like going to the gym, you have to do it consistently. You have to do it appropriately. We know that the kids with the high incidence disabilities actually can almost always learn the same thing anybody else can learn, but traditionally they need more frequent and more intensive instruction to get it. Frequent, on a really regular basis. You can't do this once a week. You must do repeated reading, PALS or whatever, a minimum of 3 times a week. That's frequency. Every time you do it, you must do it intensively, meaning not once during this day's term. You must read it 4 or 5 times. That's intensive practice. And if you don't do that, you're not going to, I'm going to kill this analogy in just a minute, you're not going to build that reading muscle, right? It's like going to the gym to eat cheesecake. Doesn't work that way. Okay? You gotta do it with that kind of strength. PALS is about doing it relatively quickly so the kids don't get frustrated, switching it up so they work on a range of skills, and so there's this variety in what the kids do. So even if PALS is too much for you, I urge you, if you have kids who are getting over that threshold of decoding, they still gotta work on their decoding, but they're getting ready to really start working on fluency, you have to appreciate fluency can only happen if they get lots of practice reading. And that practice, because what we are building in fluency is speed and accuracy, that practice cannot be dominated by decoding and word attack. That's why we do repeated reading with easy to read material. Because what's hard is fluency, not decoding, which is a precursor to fluency. So some kids aren't ready for it. Some kids really need their Wilson or their Orton Gillingham, right, to really tried and true great approaches. When they get good at this, this is going to be an entree for your student to strengthen those undergirding skills, which sound like they're actually pretty solid anyway, and really start to focus on how to comprehend. You can't comprehend without fluency. There's no shortcut. You're making me nervous, isn't it?
Well, I just have a comment, because I think this is great, and I think that I always tried to assign like mixed groups, and that
Yeah.
one has a strength, the other. And about 3 years ago, or whenever we went to map testing, I was told, studies show you can't do that, you have to group them by ability.
Huh.
So I think it's kind of interesting.
Listen to me, don't ever listen to people from universities.
No, I just, I think it's kind of interesting, because
Yeah,
I argued this point and was very shot down by the presenter.
I would say if the
So I
range
don't
is,
know if anyone else had that experience, but
if the range is huge, we
Yeah.
can understand that's a problem.
sure,
But some variation is good,
sure.
right?
I totally agree. I mean, I think that this is, I think this is wonderful. I can throw this back now.
I was gonna say though, for what you were saying, I think Tally and I, because you're in third grade, I'm in fourth grade right now, I feel like it depends on what you're doing though, like for my, yeah, for my guided reading groups, I have them with similar like ability levels, because some of them can read like such a more complex text. But like if my kids were reading Scholastic or the science test, or the science textbook, I agree with what you're saying, because some of them, if I put all like my low readers together, they wouldn't be able to read it, and there'd be no one
Well,
like
it-
holding
that-
them accountable for that.
That was my
So-
point. And I, was just so completely shut down, so that's why.
I would go, what was that expression though, ask for forgiveness and permission?
Well,
Yeah.
You're doing the right thing.
I'm so old, I do what I
Yeah.
want anyway.
I'm curious what he gave you as a basis for
He said
the fact that you
studies.
need to group them.
He said, the research, he said, because I gave my arguments, and he said, but the research shows that they do better.
They do better because
Because
The groups-
the higher ones strive more together, basically.
and what with the lower groups, you would have, they would get more, they would have more interventions,
Right.
more outside
Well,
support.
no, because we don't have that.
This was the person coming
Right,
out
I
from
mean,
the perspective of standardized testing, and they were looking to drive up the scores. So they were talking about kids at the top end of the group, pushing, trying to push those kids even higher up on the test scores. I remember that conversation, and how frustrated we were about what they were saying to us. And it doesn't make any sense at all to do that, because then you've got that lower group floundering. But they were more interested in how we were gonna push all of those kids at the top half of the run toward.
So it was ultimately the argument you're holding them back.
There's always research
Right,
that, you
right.
know, there's always
Right.
some research you could,
Right.
Yeah.
to support your.
Well, because
Forget
people,
about the kids.
How long has it been
That's
since
it.
your research has been standing in front of 20 kids teaching, so.
Right.
but they don't want us to ever forget that there are kids who are so advanced. We have to think about them too, and we have to, give them the push that they deserve,
They're
because they're
way
so
more comfortable in
accelerated,
a group of
you
their
know.
peers, learning from one another than they are,
Together.
Right.
being barked at by us. So
Right.
I'm on Kim's page where you're mixing these groups,
depends on
you
the
have all
activity.
these
If you give them, like,
multi-talented kids, and
tasks,
they're learning so much
tasks.
better.
Like a race.
Yeah.
That's
So I
what
guess,
each other.
to split it down the middle, right? Sure, so you're a fifth grade teacher, we'll say. And you've got lots of kids who are reading second, third, fourth, and fifth grade level. And they all need to work on their fluency, so great, put them in PALS. But you have this one kid who's reading at the seventh grade level, right? That kid's doing great. What are you wasting the kid's time working on reading for, right? I mean, work on seventh grade level reading with that kid. They don't belong in this intervention anyway. But some
But it's a social activity.
variation helps everybody. The tutor, the stronger the two readers that we've just been talking about, learns and benefits. And not just because they're, as some parents bound to complain to you, not just because they're doing your job for you. Why is that kid teaching my kid? You should be teaching my kid, right? That's not what's happening here. That kid's getting something out of this experience too. So in defense of fat heads from universities, sure, if the kid's way, way above, of course, they don't belong in the room anyway, otherwise. Okay, yeah?
Right.
So,
Right.
this is more the room I'm familiar with. Let's say a quick little bit about reading comprehension. Reading comprehension also comes in different levels. So if your kids are having difficulty with comprehending, you might want to think about what kind of comprehension is it they're having difficulty with. And we really want to go in stages. First, it's that literal or textually explicit. Go back and find out the character's name. Go back and tell us exactly what happened. Go back and tell us who did that or what happened when they did that. Go find it. You can even say to them literally, put your finger where it tells you the answer. That's the first step of comprehension. It's recall, it's memory. Lots of our kids have memory challenges. For those kids, they start to build that strength by doing short passages. So before we talk about the other two, let's talk about that for just a minute. So some kids have difficulty comprehending because they just don't get it, they're not putting it together. Those are the kids who we really want to be sure their fluency is intact. Because fluency is an indicator that cognitively they're ready to focus on comprehending. The big reason they're not comprehending is probably they're not consistently fluent. So we know what to do about that, help them become consistently fluent. Then we have kids who aren't attending to what they're reading, even though they are reading fluently. Those kids need to learn that skill. Some of those kids generally have weak memories. Others just weren't attending, and they need to learn to pay attention. Just as we've been doing with repeated readings, give them short amounts of material to attend to, and really, really practice doing literal or textually explicit recall. Go back and find them. I'm going to ask you 5 things. Go back and find them all. And really make them go back and find them. Don't just say, you got it wrong, let's try another paragraph. Make them go back and find it. Make them figure out, right, this is where it is. This is what I was reading about. I love to say to my college students when we talk about textbooks, I always say, you all are textbook readers, you've been reading textbooks for half your lives or longer, right? And so you all know what a good textbook reader does when they're assigned to read a chapter. The first thing they do is to go to the end of the chapter and do what? And half the room looks at me like, what's he talking about, right? You realize, oh, okay, you guys. What do?
Look at the questions.
They look at the chapter summary and the questions that come at the end, right? Now I know what I'm supposed to be paying attention to while I read. So give your kids an agenda. Say, I want you to read this, and when you finish, I'm going to ask you 1, 2, 3. Now I know what to start looking for while I read. So they develop that skill of learning to look for what's right there in the passage. Now, the kids who legitimately have weak memory, right? The kids who leave lunch on the counter at home, right? That's a bigger challenge. It's really hard to build memory skills. We can, but the honest truth is we can't make huge gains. You have to teach people to be attentive. That works for some of them. Some people still just have weak memories. That's a classic trait of kids with LD and a classic trait of kids with intellectual disability, Down syndrome in particular. Right? They need to practice a skill on a highly regular basis, or it's like starting over every time. Frequent and intensive practice is going to help get them there. But they're always going to have a weak memory. That's reality, right? Get pretty good at textually explicit, then you're ready for the textually implicit or the inferential. Things that are directly inferred, although not literally stated by the author. So the author's leading the horse to the water kind of thing, right? When they get pretty good at that, then they're ready for scriptally implicit. I'm getting better at that. I always say scripturally, and I think, well, it's not Bible class. Scriptally implicit, where they can really start to bring in their own perspective, their own prior knowledge, their own opinion. But you really can't jump to these big ideas about what you read until you're really good at the foundational levels of comprehension. So, I haven't got another strategy to show you. If you want to stop and do that, we can. But instead to say, just as we said for building fluency, you have to look at what are the components of it. What's the precursor to each level of comprehension? And you have to build that sufficiently so they can do what comes next. So, if you're as old as me, when you went to school as a student, teachers were all into stage theory. You had to master this stuff before you could move on to that stuff, right? And then we went away to teachers' college, and there were all these new theories. We said, that's not the way I was taught, right? Where they're saying, forget all those stages, let kids engage and do interesting things. Well, everybody's right. Right? We'd have kids in 12th grade working on decoding if they had to master it before they could do anything else. They still have to work on decoding because there's no way around it, there's no shortcut. But you've got to do the other stuff too. So when they start to get relatively good at whatever is the precursor to the next, they can kind of phase in. But don't give up practicing the foundational skills. You still have to be improved. How are we doing? Am I going too fast? Just the opposite? Am I going too slow? I'm having a Goldilocks moment. Okay. Can we turn the page and talk about math?
Yes.
Okay. So, you better believe it, I've only got one drum beat. Here's the story. You coming to see me? Oh, okay. Making me nervous.
No, you're fine.
So, same drum beat. It's especially true in math. Things need to be learned in a certain sequence. And if they are not, then kids aren't ready for what's next. And the way we build math skill, including comprehension of those skills, is lots of practice. So, first it's useful for us to remember that the words mathematics and arithmetic are not synonyms. So there are really two main components to math. Being able to do numerical calculations, you know, your basic facts, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and solving problems that involve quantities or numbers. That's really what we're doing in math, is those two things, right? So that's important for us to remember that. So when we look at the kids with the high incidence disabilities who struggle in math, what's the problem? As I like to say to the special ed majors at BC, I like to say to them, you know, when you take your car to the mechanic, you describe that funny little noise it makes, you explain what's going on there, right? And then you hope immediately your mechanic has like 3 theories. You can go right in there and find them, right? You don't want them like popping the hood and thinking, what have I tried today, right? It's the same thing for us when our kids struggle with reading or math or writing or whatever. Something detectable is going on there. Only so many different things can make your car make that funny sound. Only so many different things can make your car shut off in the middle of Gallivan Boulevard or whatever, right? Only so many different things can do that. Only so many different things can explain why your kids keep getting the wrong answer. And we find, for the kids with the highest disabilities, it's these things. Insufficient number sense. Memory and strategy deficits specific to mathematics. Memory's a huge problem in math, right? Comprehension, their ability to comprehend conceptually what are they doing in math, and when it comes to word problems. Having, associated to that, having the language and the communication skills for reading, writing, and discussing math. Whether it's a word problem, or it just says 2 + 2 = blank. There's a lot of language involved in that. We presume kids have it, they don't always. And, of course, motivation and self-esteem. So we can try to figure out, for our kids who struggle in math, which of these common problems do we need to address? That's our starting point. We're like that mechanic now, right? We're taking the kid into the shop, and we're diagnosing. So, I know that gets me in a lot of trouble, analogies like that. My colleagues who are not in special ed like to say, oh, you special ed people, you're so medical model. You think the kid's sick and you can fix the kid. And I know I'm being accused of something and I'm being insulted, and I say, yes, that's exactly right. Maybe the sick part's not the real word there, you know, but right, there's something this kid can't do. There's something this kid needs to learn how to do. What's the problem with saying that, right? So, math needs to be learned in sequence. Number sense, really understanding your numbers. My niece, I'm so proud of my niece. She's a special ed teacher. That's why I'm proud of her. But she's got 2 boys, 5-year-old and a 4-year-old. Her hands are full. And I saw them just over the weekend for Easter, and they kept on saying to me, test me on my math facts, test me on my math facts. And it was so impressive. These kids really had it down. They had their single digit addition and subtraction. The older one was doing some double digits, and so I thought, well, let's be careful here, you know, and so we tried a little multiplication, and we got that. And I thought, oh, I know what she's done. She's just made them memorize. And so I said, okay, which is bigger, 6 or 8? And they rolled their eyes like I was an idiot. They knew the answer. I was so impressed. They have number sense. They haven't just memorized the numbers of math facts, they understand how 6 relates to 8. How different is 8 from 6? That kind of thing. That's what it means to have number sense. And they've got their basic facts down.
That's fine.
Hi? Okay, sorry. So these are the super foundational challenges for kids. Then they have to be good at estimation. So enough about my grandnephews. But they have to be good at estimation. They have to be good at having a sense, am I in the ballpark? Am I probably right? Is this way off? Right? The IRS can tell you that I am not good at estimation because they circle my error and send me a fine to demonstrate it. It's like, I should have caught that. I can't believe I did that, right? Did you know they fine you when you make an error in their favor? That's really chutzpah, you know? Yeah. And then the skill of problem solving. We find, when we get students who enter our doctoral program, they have to take a sequence of statistics courses. Now, statisticians love to say statistics is not math, it just uses math. Well, it feels like math to me. We find the students who really struggle in statistics actually are weak at these foundational skills. They're the ones who can't spit out their math facts, who can do the math, but do it slowly, who make a lot of basic errors. So, super important that our kids get the foundations of these skills. Otherwise, you're going to have great difficulty going forward. So, how do our student do? Did pretty good. Maybe could do a little bit better in terms of, right, lining up, place values. So, how did our student do? Better yet, what did our student do?
Yeah.
What did our student do?
Place the number 11. Estimated incorrectly.
Estimated incorrectly? Yeah, or didn't estimate at all. Right? Let's try one together. Everybody, what's 5 plus 8?
13.
Put down the
3.
carry the. Everybody, what's 5 plus 1? Carry the. Ah, right? When our kids make mistakes, there's a pattern to it. Putting down the digits is supposed to be carried. Aha! Simple memory problem. Forgot the procedure. Got it backwards and memorized it that way. Also, is not observing the place value columns at all. Right? Now we know what to work on with this kid, don't we? When your kids make errors, when they get 30% correct on the math worksheet or whatever, there's some pattern. There's something for you to find that they are having trouble with. So, a really simple thing to do is to teach them to begin by discovering the sign. The biggest, commonest, well, no, I almost lied. One of the biggest and commonest errors our kids make is they know that you start on the right, so they start on the right without first checking whether it's an addition or subtraction problem, for example. So first thing you do is you nail down what kind of problem is this. Then you can read the problem, not first, second. Answer it if you can. If not, draw it and check it. And then, don't forget kids, write the answer. Right? We do it on scrap paper, we're done. Right. So, really important to guide our kids. The use of manipulatives. Concrete, representational, abstract. You know that sequence? That's used from everything from number sense, right? Those squiggly lines, those are numbers. But before you can associate what the squiggly line that everyone calls a 3 is, you have to know what this is, 1, 2, 3. And how's that different from this, or this, right? So we start with concrete things, manipulatives they can touch and move around. 1, 2, 3, I can touch them, right? When they get really good at doing math concretely, 2 plus 3 or 3 plus 2, I can count them, 1, 2, 3, I can count 2, now I can put them together. Now they can go to the representational level. They draw pineapples, they draw little dots and sets and that kind of thing, make hash marks or whatever, so they represent the concrete thing, the manipulatives they can touch, right? And then they can count them out, and then they're ready for the abstract, where you draw those funny little squiggly lines that they're right on the board, but you know, right? So the concrete representational abstract sequence works well. For everything from number sense up through more involved solving word problems. I know we're very tight on time, so I'm just going to say one more thing and then check with you before I give you a couple of handouts, okay? Backing up, it said, answer the question if you can. If not, try drawing it. So that ties us back to the representational part. See if you can draw the problem. When kids get to word problems, and you tell them to draw the problem, now it's the story that they're attending to, and they're having trouble finding the math. So here's a math problem. At each of the 2 ends of a straight path, a man planted a tree. And then every 5 feet along the path, he planted another tree. The length of the path is 15 feet, so how many trees were planted? Good, right? Give it a minute, you can do it. Here's, oh, right, back. Here's how a student with a learning disability in middle school attempted to answer the question. Literally drew the story. I'm surprised it's not a stick figure of a man with a shovel, right? Here's a classmate without a disability. So when we teach kids to think about a math problem, make sure their schema is a mathematics schema and not a narration schema. Concrete, representational, abstract, and then when they get into really understanding problems, such as in word problems, make sure they're focused on the math sentence, not the narrative story. That's a little aha moment for lots of kids with disabilities. Oh, math sentence. So I know we're very tight on time. I apologize for that. Coming around for you are 2 handouts. These are the big ideas that anchor mathematics. So these are the foundational concepts kids need to get. Things like, what does equal mean? The commutative property, this kind of thing. Let me start those here if you would, thank you. And this other sheet that's coming around is 2-sided. And if I get out my glasses, I can tell you what it is. Yes, right, good. So, one side is some tips for teaching place value and number sense skills from elementary through high school level. Things that they will tolerate and do for practicing, going to the gym if you will. And on the flip side is some ways to systematically teach math facts. The broken record's going to say it one more time. Foundational skills have to be mastered, or everything that builds on top of them isn't going to come across very well. Okay? So, what should we say? What do you? Comment, question, point of view, example? Union rules say you gotta stop.
Very helpful.
I hope so. I'm sorry that we tried to pack so much in, but we wanted to be responsive to the survey. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank you.